Hello everyone, welcome to Carpo's channel. Today we're going to talk about Monsanto. Should get right to the point because I guess I could talk for hours on this subject and probably bring up every single fact and figure and point, but there are several documentaries already about this subject. I just wanted to give my input on it and what I think about GM crops or genetically modified organisms, and to try to give the most balanced approach I possibly can. I have always been very opposed to Monsanto, first of all, as soon as I learned about their practices. And several years ago, I wrote a song. I think it was like Monsanto, You Should Be Ashamed, or something to that effect. And I believe it's still on YouTube, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure if you look it up, you'd find it. It was horribly done. It was like a one take through, and I was frustrated, so I wrote a song about it. But I also have several papers, blogs I've written, and videos I've made about Monsanto. Now, since that time, several years ago, I've had discussions with people about GM crops and tried to weigh the benefits and risks, and I've tried to open my eyes to the possibility of them being a benefit for us. And that means it's only fair that I look at both sides of the issue and say, well, from the viewpoint of somebody who, let's say, is working on GM crops, who in their mind thinks, well, this is going to help somebody who perhaps needs a drought-resistant, drought-tolerant corn crop, or soybeans that are tolerant to a mold or an insect. And there are many different interests and many different needs for different farmers around the world. But let's just say this, for thousands of years humans have been working with agriculture. We have been modifying crops genetically for millennia, but we've been doing it through selective breeding. This is taking the two best seeds and trying to grow another crop, grafting and splicing, and trying to understand how nature works. And we've come a really long way, and our ancestors didn't have nearly the size of fruits and vegetables that we have now. But all of that effort, all of that work to create these, what they call heirloom seeds, which is all I use in my garden, all of that effort could be thrown out the window if we start cross-pollinating genetically modified crops that we don't understand the complexities of. So here's the thing, can we trust the collective, first of all? There are a lot of people out there who are pro and against. A lot of people feel very strongly, that we could actually feed the world with some of these crops, or that as farmland diminishes, the population increases, we're going to need more crops that can handle growing in different regions and climates. And in some instances, I could see that. But let's just give you an example. I believe they added a flounder gene to a tomato. This was, a decade ago or longer. And this flounder, a fish, they wanted to add this gene in and splice it into the tomato so it could be more cold tolerant, just as the fish are. And I'm not even sure if that one worked out or the specifics of it, but that was very early in the process. Now it's not just a few strains that are used for particular areas. They are trying to dominate the industry and agriculture around the world, and they're doing so with cutthroat and horribly brutal tactics, almost mafioso style. And the way they treat the farmers is complete bullshit. So the word of the day is obdurate. Obdurate means stubborn and refusing to change your course of action. And I thought that applied perfectly to a company who makes billions of dollars a year and steps all over, people who have been working with the land for generations. Let's just say whoever has the loudest voice, this is something I've learned about everything. Whoever has the loudest voice often has the most to gain and the most to lose. That means that profits can be severely diminished when one person makes a claim that something is dangerous or may cause cancer. And in this case, the issue is glyphosate, otherwise known as Roundup. And this is the one that most people have pounced on. Glyphosate is determined by the World Health Organization to be probably carcinogenic in humans. Many places have already taken steps to ban it, many areas around the US, but also many other countries. Many of them have banned it for personal use, but only used for commercial use. And it's not just that they're spraying this stuff on the plants. It's in order to help during the season to help with pests or weeds. They're spraying it right at harvest. And this is one of the biggest controversies right now. Glyphosate desiccant, basically. They're using this compound, which is probably carcinogenic, to spray on it right before they harvest in order to desiccate the plant and dry it out. This means that it doesn't have time to work it out of its system, or to, this is a practice that I see could be very detrimental. But here's where here's where the problems happen. Let's just say that the GMOs are beneficial in some cases. Monsanto doesn't want to just be contributors to helping the world. They want to be profit driven. They are only slaves to their shareholders like every other company. And they have tried to rebrand their company over and over, but I'll tell you, they've been around for over 100 years. And now that they've dominated the U.S., they have basically been working their way around the world for decades now, and using other countries as their testing grounds. And countries that are desperate, they can actually sell them, say, their corn seeds at a cheaper price, even taking a loss for the company. But once they get the people tied into their Terminator seeds, which basically it's illegal for you to regrow from the seed crop that you harvest. Some of the seeds won't regrow, but other ones, if you get caught growing them without buying them, they're a licensed product. They have patented a genetic seed, the genes in a seed, and the only reason they were able to get to do this is because there was a totally separate court case which dealt with a microorganism that somebody was working on, and they wanted to be able to own the rights and a patent to it. That set the precedent for Monsanto and other companies to say, look, I'm patenting a seed, a plant, nature. This is something that I just find so absurd. I'm just disgusted with the fact that people would even tolerate this without understanding the implications, that it's more than just glyphosate. It's more than just changing genetics. It's dominating our world food supply for profit. And in other countries, and here, not only are they able to get their land subsidized, they can get government grants, and they can get tax-free, basically entire plots that are tax-free because they can do it saying, well, this is for the good of the people. There are several different, technical reasons, but when you have billions of dollars at your disposal for lobbying, you can pretty much profit any way you want. And a while back, the people tried to get mandatory labeling on products that contain genetically modified products, and Monsanto went ape shit. They tried to block it everywhere, and they're still doing it to this day. And you may look on milk cartons and see that they may say, from cows not treated with RBST or RBGH. There's a couple different ones. Those are Monsanto products. Monsanto wanted to get into the milk business, so they created a synthetic hormone. See, the BGH is a natural hormone in the cow, but the R is the synthetic version of it. And a lot of companies were totally opposed to this, and a lot of dairies tried to fight it. So they fought the dairy industry, just like they fought the farming industry. They go into towns, farming towns, and they send in these scouts that will go look through the fields, and they'll watch farmers, they will film them, they will take pictures of them, trying to catch someone who is either using their seeds or improperly storing, or one guy who was cleaning seeds for other people. I mean, they're not just in it for their own profit. They're in to cut everybody else off. And we're talking about the farmers here. The fucking lifeblood of our tables, the food that we eat. These farmers are gathering in their towns in these town hall meetings and saying, what do we do? Once again, it comes down to who has the loudest voice. It's definitely not the farmers. Not only are they tied in with the seed companies, but they're tied in with the tractors and the GPS units that they use for their harvesting. It goes deep. They're not even allowed to work on their own machines. They have been fined millions of dollars for, trying to do their own repairs. There was somebody who tried to publish a website of how to work on your own tractor, but the company, John Deere, has their own proprietary software, and they basically, they filed a lawsuit, and the person had to take the website down. There's a lot of controversy over these companies that just want every penny. They're just squeezing the blood out, and they're sowing confusion and propaganda so the people don't know any better. And no wonder there's a distrust, in these companies. But, the same claims that, oh well, glyphosate is safe. You know, they're telling you that it's not going to harm you, and they're trying to set the standards for the limits of exposure. But a lot of folks don't realize that Monsanto created Agent Orange, and also I believe PCBs. And I'm not blaming them for the things that they created that turned out to be either carcinogenic or damaging to the environment later. I'm blaming them for the fact that they covered it up, damn well knowing that people were getting sick and dying. I mean, they sprayed barrels and barrels and barrels of Agent Orange in Vietnam over the canopy in the forest. And I have personal interest in this, and I've made videos about this because my father died from carcinoma, lung cancer, which was caused by his exposure likely to Agent Orange while he was in Vietnam. And so, yeah, if Monsanto knowingly hid that, perhaps, that gives me a little bias against the company, but I'm definitely not using that as my basis for this video. It's more of the general frustration. Threatening farmers, patenting nature, they're making a lot of money. A lot of money. And that's fine. If people want to praise capitalism, so be it. But you have to separate money from the food supply. There's a certain, I believe it's 90% of the soybeans in the U.S. are now genetically modified. 80% of the corn is now genetically modified. So that's a huge amount of profit. They're not happy with that. They want to dominate the rest of the market, force the other farmers out of business, file lawsuits against farmers, and refuse to allow labeling of GM crops. And one of the saddest things is that a while back they came up with this new DT corn. It's a GE DT, genetically engineered corn that's supposed to be drought tolerant. And they got about 3% of the crops in the U.S. and the farmers to use this drought tolerant variety. It failed utterly. In fact, it performed worse than, just standard corn. So, what did they do? Did they pull out and say, okay, we made a mistake? No. They went to Africa and they tried to sell it to Tanzania and Kenya and African countries, saying, oh, we've got this great drought-tolerant corn, suckering them into buying something. This is like the charlatan who's selling something they know doesn't work, or the guy who bought a bunch of something that that was bunk or turned out to be fake, and instead of taking the loss, they're out selling it to someone else. You're not just selling someone a product. This isn't a pair of Nikes or a sweatshirt or a car. This is food. I mean, I've already made videos talking about the water crisis. I mean, that issue is completely beyond this, but it's a huge component of it. Food and water are being dominated by Western interests, monopolies that have billions of dollars and continue to rake in the cash. And so the last thing I'd like to talk about is the bentweed in Oregon. Apparently, Monsanto was working with Scotts, which Scotts makes Miracle-Gro. And they were doing this out in, I believe, Idaho, and then there was one down south from here in Oregon, near Bend. And these were locations where they were growing bent grass, or bentweed, I believe. It was bent grass. Anyhow, this particular type of grass is very desirable by landscapers for golf courses and other places. It's easy to mow, it keeps a nice shape. So they wanted to not just make a quality grass, they wanted to make a glyphosate-resistant grass. Now, if you don't realize how dumb this is right off the bat, if you think about it for a minute, they're basically creating a nuisance weed that is tolerant to glyphosate. And they succeeded, but then a giant storm came and it blew seeds 13 miles away from the main field. Now they're creeping into the farms. Now, south of here in the Willamette Valley, we have a lot of grass farmers that grow like lawns, different types of grass for different needs. If that bentweed gets into their grass farms, then they'll have a weed that they cannot get rid of. And that forces them to go to some of the other chemicals which are even harsher. Whereas glyphosate is allowed to be used near water sources, these other chemicals are not. They're horrible. They can only be used in deserts. So there's a cleanup effort. I believe it's costing $250 million a year. But Monsanto convinced the people, the taxpayers, to fund it by just signing a thing that says, okay, we won't pursue this anymore if you guys take care of the mess. And so they agreed to it. And then a year later, they decided to try to repatent it again and just said, "Screw it, we're not going to, honor the deal that we made." And it's not just that grass. Over the past decade, many more weeds have been coming up in farmers' fields that are tolerant to glyphosate or Roundup. Makes absolute sense. I mean, it's just like the insects that become tolerant to DDT or anything else. Over time, nature finds a way to adapt. It's why we have MRSA. You know, it's a resistant, bacteria, staph or an infection that you cannot get rid of with standard antibiotics. And it just gets worse and worse, and we're trying to create a monoculture. So my point being that once the pests figure out a way to dominate the monoculture, all of this corn is susceptible. All of these soybeans are susceptible. And on top of that, many countries won't buy it from us. So the idea that we're making 90% of these soybeans, I believe China won't even import them if they're GM crops. Makes you wonder, if China's not going to accept GM crops, even if they're cheaper, maybe that tells you that they're a little bit more aware of their health and maybe care a little bit more, or maybe not. I don't know. But this company has done wrong, and it's never really admitted. It's just tried to change hands. A few years back, they wanted to kind of rebrand themselves. But it's the same company. It's always been the same company. And it always probably will be. So I'm not here to say that nobody should try messing with genes, because we're never going to avoid that. That's the world we live in now. And once the tools are available, we will use them regardless. People don't care about ethics sometimes or the possibilities in the future. We tend to just jump right in. So the fact that they exist is one thing, but the fact that they're allowed to basically run themselves like a mafia organization and treat the farmers the way they do, and then sell seeds that they're well aware don't work to other countries, I find is a shameful business practice. And so I just had to speak it out on it. Thanks for listening, and take care, my friends. Be well.